your profession is a difficult one for sure. It requires extreme mental abilities, physical abilities, a lot, I guess, like jiu-jitsu, right? And you are a master at your profession, and you're also a master at jiu-jitsu. You're a 2nd degree black belt. Moving a little bit away from your profession, we also want to know, how did you start jiu-jitsu? When did you start? Was it early, 5 years old, also like sharks, or how does your journey in jiu-jitsu look like?
I wish I could say I started when I was 5, but jiu-jitsu was not in Europe in the 80s. It just wasn't around. So I actually, my interest in martial arts had always been from when I was young.
How old are you, Yannis?
I'm 43.
43.
So I started jiu-jitsu when I was 25, I think, in 2003. So before that, I had done like taekwondo, boxing, and then the one I was most into was Krav Maga, which I had trained when I was in LA. And in Krav Maga, they had, they would include ground fighting, and they said, oh, ground fighting is just from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I knew about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because I had watched in the late 90s UFC. So
and on the times it was easier to find out about Jiu-Jitsu? How was that?
I knew about it from the UFC, from I remember watching UFC 2 in the late 90s. And, it was Hoist, obviously, put it on the map. And I actually also got really interested in submission grappling from watching Ken Shamrock, who was not a jiu-jitsu guy, he was a catch wrestler. But I remember watching in UFC 1 when he was fighting Pat Smith, and I didn't know anything about grappling then. So I thought, you see these two big guys, I'm like, oh, this is going to be a brawl. And then Ken just does this takedown and he drops for a heel hook. And I was like, what is that?
Yeah, like heel hook with foot lock. I remember.
What is that? And you see this massive guy, he doesn't throw a punch, but the other guy is like screaming in pain. So that's when I started to get interested in submission grappling. And then I did a little bit of jiu-jitsu from Krav Maga. And then I moved to Hawaii in 2003 to start my PhD. And it just so happened that Helson Gracie, he actually lived on Oahu.
And Helson's brother with Hickson.
Yeah, he's brother Hickson, Hoist, Hoyler, Horion. And so he had he had multiple academies on Oahu, and he lived there. And so I started training at one of his affiliates, and I got to train with him about once a month because, again, he would come down and train quite regularly.
And how was the type of train there?
It was very different. The jiu-jitsu landscape was very different from what it is today. It was much less popular. Now in Hawaii, it was kind of different from the rest of the US in that in Hawaii, martial arts have always been very popular. So I think Helson moved there in the 80s. So grappling was getting pretty popular in Hawaii, but it still was very different. I remember the first tournament I did as a white belt, and the highest belts competing were 2 purple belts. Like everybody stopped to watch that. That was the highest level at the time. There was only 3 black belts on the whole
tournament
island.
Was there in Hawaii?
Yeah, it was in. Yeah, Helson used to run a tournament, his own tournament.
He's still there?
I don't think he is, but I'm not entirely sure. I left in 2010, so he definitely has schools there, but I'm not sure if he lives there.
How old is he? Like 70?
I think he must be in his 70s. Now. Yeah. But jiu-jitsu was a different sport then too. The moves that we do now is kind of were not really around then. There a lot of the fancy stuff, the X guard, the deep half, all these sorts of worm guard, things like that didn't exist. So
how was the jiu-jitsu at the time?
It was a lot more, basically closed guard based. Very sort of classic old school.
You're really good in omoplatas. I was watching training. You always get everyone with omoplatas.
That's my favorite move. So my favorite move as a white belt was actually a triangle. And part of that was because, Hawaii had a lot of strong guys. And so I was always ending up on the bottom, no matter what. So I learned to play as a bottom person and playing closed guard. And I loved triangles. And then I really hurt my lower back, actually when I was a brown belt. And it meant that it makes finishing triangles really hard for me. So then I started transitioning from triangle to doing omoplata because that didn't hurt my back.
I also prefer omoplata. I don't know why.
And now I like. The other thing is with triangles, I have a hard time, especially if it's a big, strong guy and they put a lot of pressure. If you don't get the submission, you risk them passing.
Now I'm doing a lot like omoplata. So if I do the triangle, I prefer to do the no arm triangle. I like to call the exorcism.
Yeah, you've caught me with that a couple times.
It's really tight.
But I love the omoplata because again, even if the guy's really strong, once you lock that in, once you get a leg across his face, it's hard for him to stop it.
And you went from white belt to black belt with Helsen?
No, I went from white to 4-stripe purple under Helsen, and then I actually moved. So I was there 7 years.
7 years of training.
Yeah, and then I moved to North Florida, and so I trained with Beto Nunes, who's he's now a 4th degree black belt under De La Riva. So I got my brown and black over the next 3.5 years with Beto. I then actually moved to Scotland, and I was there for 2 years. I trained with a guy called Rick Young. Who
and have Jiu-Jitsu there in Scotland?
Yeah, they do. So the first British-born black belt is in Scotland, Rick Young. So he was my instructor, and he got his black belt from Mauricio Gomez. So this was Roger Gracie's dad. So right. Hodger's now
the creator of the Knee on the Belly.
Yeah. So, and Hodger is based out in London. I think Mauricio lives in Brazil, but he comes to Britain very regularly. But Rick, who was then my instructor for 2 years, was the first black belt given to a British guy, and that was by Mauricio. So I trained with him for 2 years. Then I got the job here at FIU, and I moved to Miami and came to Fight Sports, and have been with Cyborg.
And how you find out about Fight Sports? Yeah.
Well, of course, I knew about Cyborg. Who doesn't in Jiu-Jitsu? But there's a lot of great Jiu-Jitsu guys in South Florida. So when I was getting ready to come over here, I was like, where shall I go and train? And then one of the guys, when I was a purple belt, I used to teach him as a white belt. Another black belt from here, Jay Oliveira, was training here. And so
shout out to Jay.
Shout out to Jay.
Man, we miss him.
So so Jay and I have known each other a long time from back in Hawaii. So I was like, okay, I'll come here and in fact, the two names that always, when I was asking around where the best places to train in South Florida, the two names given to me was Cyborg and Wagner Rocha.
Right.
And so I came here with Cyborgs, then of course Wagner trains here all the time. So I got both of them.
And I have a question for you. You already competed in Jiu-Jitsu? You competed a lot in Jiu-Jitsu?
I used to compete quite a bit up until just before I got brown belt. And then I hurt my lower back.
Right.
And at that point, I had stopped. And I've always been meaning to go back, but it's been a long time. So I've got to do it. I've got to do it sometime soon.
You should do it. You should maybe Master Wars.
I should. I've never competed as a black belt.
I train here with you, and you also my student here in the class, and I know your potential, Yannis. You're really tough guy. Well, and you're very, very technical. If you fight, like you're going to be Master 3, how much you weigh?
About 186. 185.
Yeah, Master 3, middle, maybe medium heavy. You can do really well.
I should because I do. I mean,
should do it.
I train under you now a lot.
We know you're not scared. What's scarier, the sharks in the ocean or the sharks on the mat?
I mean, it's an interesting question because there's different types of fear, right? I mean, I don't get that nervous going in the water with sharks now, but I would get nervous competing, and certainly there's guys here. I'm like, oh god, I would get nervous having to roll with, but I couldn't. Jiu-Jitsu is a very important part of my life, and I really couldn't be without it, regardless of competition. Just the fact that I love doing it.
Why? Why do you feel that way about Jiu-Jitsu?
I mean, to begin with, I needed, especially when I was doing my PhD, it was something to do that was not related to science and a physical activity and just a sport, but it became a lot more than that. And I think sometimes it's hard to describe why. You just find something. I've done lots of different sports and they didn't keep my interest, but with Jiu-Jitsu, it's hard for me to put it into words. I remember when I first started as a white belt, and at the time we were training out of a gymnasium where they were doing gymnastics. It was actually they were mostly gymnastics class, and we had a tiny square where we could roll in the corner. Right. So we were able to roll when they all left. So we were like rolling till 10, 11 p.m. And it just was like you just would roll, and I just loved it. I loved the technical side of things. The term that they say Jiu-Jitsu is like a physical chess match. I actually used to be a competitive chess player.
No way.
So for me, I think that description is really true. And I love the technicality of it. I love the biomechanics of it. Jiu-Jitsu is all biomechanics. It's understanding leverage. It's understanding
for sure
turning body parts in directions they're not supposed to go. And I just love that technical side of things.